The first slivers of dawn had barely kissed the eastern hills when I set out, the cool night air still clinging to the ancient stones of the road. It was the familiar route, you understand, the one that curves and descends from the elevated plateau of Jerusalem, winding its way down towards the warmer, lower basin where Jericho sleeps. Indeed, many a tale begins with a man simply going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, for it is a journey as common as it is long. Every traveler knows this descent, the gradual shift in elevation, the way the air thins and then thickens again. My small donkey, bless his patient heart, took each step with a quiet diligence, his hooves a soft, rhythmic percussion against the well-worn path. It was a sound I knew intimately, a constant, gentle accompaniment to my thoughts, which even then were beginning to drift, like smoke from a dying fire, slow and curling into the morning air. The sun was still shy, peeking over the ridge, painting the distant peaks in hues of soft, dusty rose and quiet violet before settling into the familiar ochre of our land. I wasn't in any great rush, you see. My journey was my own, and the rhythm of the road was the rhythm of my heart. The sun, now a little bolder, began to sprinkle tiny golden dust motes into the air, dancing in the shafts of light that angled across the path. They shimmered like tiny, silent thoughts, caught and illuminated for a moment before fading. My mind, already, was settling into that peculiar state of travel where the landscape outside begins to merge with the landscape within. The sounds were few. The rustle of a lizard in the dry grass beside the road, the distant call of an unseen bird, the soft whisper of the breeze through sparse olive trees. Each sound was amplified by the overarching quiet, a gentle reminder that even in silence, life teemed. My focus narrowed, not on any destination, but on the journey itself, on the feel of the sun's warmth slowly spreading across my shoulders, on the familiar creak of the saddle, on the steady, unhurried pace. I imagined the centuries of footsteps that had smoothed these very stones, the countless stories whispered into the wind that swept through this desolate pass. This road had seen so much, carried so many hopes and burdens. It was more than just a path. It was a living memory, stretching back further than any man could count. And I, a simple traveler, was but another fleeting moment in its long, long history. The steady rhythm of my donkey's hooves against the stones was the only sound, a comforting lullaby as the sun climbed higher. I often found myself in these quiet stretches of road, a solitary figure amidst the bustling pathways of the land. My people, the Samaritans, we were different. Not quite like the Jews, not quite like the Gentiles. We walked a path that was, in many ways, our own, distinct and often misunderstood. There were times when the eyes of other travelers would linger a moment too long, a flicker of suspicion or disdain in their gaze, before they would quickly avert their eyes, perhaps mumbling a prayer to themselves to ward off ill fortune. It was a familiar dance, one I had learned to navigate with a quiet grace. This path, the one I trod, felt less about destination and more about understanding the journey itself. I had long learned to find my solace not in the bustling marketplaces where voices often grew sharp, nor in the grand temples where my presence might be met with averted faces, but in the simple, overlooked corners of the world. A gentle breeze carrying the scent of wild herbs, a lone hawk circling high above the rugged peaks, the way the light fractured through the gnarled branches of an ancient tree. These were my companions, my quiet teachers. They asked no questions of my lineage, cared nothing for my place of worship. Sometimes a wry smile would touch my lips as I considered the irony. They, with their strict adherence to the law, their emphasis on purity and separation, often missed the very holiness that unfolded around them in the everyday. While they hurried past, preoccupied with their own importance, I found a different kind of devotion in the deep, resonant hum of creation. The rustling of dry leaves under my donkey's hooves, a sound that might pass unnoticed by others, was to me a quiet symphony. The distant, mournful call of a dove, echoing from the rocky crevices, spoke volumes of a world both vast and intimately connected. My outsider status, as some might label it, often granted me a unique perspective. I was free, in a way, from the burdens of expectation that weighed down so many others. I did not need to impress, nor to conform. Instead, I could simply be. This freedom allowed my senses to open, to truly absorb the nuanced tapestry of life along these ancient roads. The subtle shift in the wind that promised a change in weather, the faint scent of charcoal smoke from a distant village clinging to the morning air, the way the shadows lengthened and danced as the sun continued its ascent. These details became my quiet universe. It was in these moments, amidst the vast open spaces, that I felt a profound connection, not to the fleeting judgments of men, but to something much larger, much more enduring. My purpose, I felt, was not to gain acceptance from those who would withhold it, but to live with an open heart, observing, understanding, and perhaps, in my own small way, reflecting the quiet beauty I found in the world. The world, after all, did not differentiate between Jew or Samaritan when it offered its sunrise or its gentle rain. And neither, I believed, should I. My heart, though often overlooked by others, carried its own quiet understanding of the world unfolding before me. My heart, though often overlooked by others, carried its own quiet understanding of the world unfolding before me. But then, a subtle discord, a jarring note in the otherwise harmonious symphony of the morning road, caught my attention. It was not a sound at first, but a disruption in the familiar pattern of the landscape itself. A dark, crumpled shape lying awkwardly at the edge of the path, just beyond a cluster of sun-baked rocks. It was too still to be a fallen branch, too unnatural to be a mere shadow. A prickle of unease, like a tiny desert thorn, began to find its way beneath my skin. My pace, which had been so steady and even, faltered. My donkey, sensing my hesitation, slowed its rhythmic clip. My pace, which had been so steady and even, faltered. My donkey, sensing my hesitation, slowed its rhythmic clip. The path itself seemed to grow longer, the distance between me and that crumpled shape expanding with each tick of my anxious thoughts. I hadn't even fully processed the swift, almost comical retreat of the priest, a man whose very robes proclaimed his devotion, when another figure began to emerge from the shimmering heat of the road behind him. This one, too, carried the distinctive markings of the temple, a dignity in his bearing that spoke of an elevated station. He was a Levite, a servant in the sacred precincts, one entrusted with the holy duties of the sanctuary. My eyes, still fixed on the prone form ahead, watched this new traveller with quiet intensity. He walked with purpose, a scroll tucked neatly under his arm, his sandals kicking up dust that settled quickly back onto the sun-baked earth. There was an air of contemplation about him, as if his mind were already engaged in profound theological debate or intricate ritual. He seemed absorbed, his gaze often fixed on the distant horizon, perhaps pondering the very laws that governed his life. As he drew nearer, the shape by the roadside inevitably came into his view. I saw the subtle shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible tensing of his shoulders. His pace, unlike the priest's sudden acceleration, did not immediately quicken. No, the Levite paused. He came to a complete stop, just a few paces from where the man lay, utterly exposed and vulnerable to the harsh elements and the harsher indifference of passers-by. His head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the gruesome sight. The Levite stood there, a silent statue of indecision, his internal struggle etched subtly across his face. He looked at the man, then down the empty road, then back at the man, as if weighing the unseen scales of duty and convenience. The sun beat down, relentlessly, upon all of us, impartial in its heat. Then, with a sigh that I felt rather than heard, he too stepped around the fallen figure, increasing his pace slightly as he continued on his way, leaving only a faint swirl of dust in his wake. And then there was only the man and I. The silence that followed felt vast and echoing, broken only by the distant caw of a bird and the gentle whisper of the wind through the dry grasses. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of dust and something metallic, something like dried blood filling my nostrils. My heart, which had been observing from a cautious distance, now quickened its rhythm, pulling me closer. I approached him, each step measured, as if walking into a sacred yet terrible space. He lay utterly still, a crumpled form against the stark earth, his clothes torn and disheveled, barely clinging to his battered frame. The thieves, it seemed, had taken more than just his possessions. They had tried to steal his very life force. His face was turned slightly towards me, though his eyes were open. They were glazed, staring at some unseen point in the vast, indifferent sky. There was no recognition in them, no spark of awareness, only a hollow emptiness. His breathing was incredibly shallow, a fragile flutter of his chest that was almost imperceptible, like the last dying embers of a fire. I knelt beside him, my shadow falling over his face, offering a brief, meager respite from the unrelenting sun. The dried blood, a dark, crusty map of violence, covered much of his skin, caked into his hair and mingled with the dust. It seemed to cling to him, heavy and unyielding. The wounds themselves, deep gashes and bruising, spoke of a brutality that turned my stomach. He was, as the old saying goes, half dead, stripped of his raiment, grievously wounded, left to perish. A wave of thoughts, sharp and insistent, immediately washed over me. This was dangerous. The bandits might still be near, lurking behind the rocks, waiting for another unsuspecting traveler, or perhaps for someone foolish enough to offer aid. And even if they were gone, there was the sheer awkwardness, the societal taboo of this moment. He was a Jew, undoubtedly. I was a Samaritan. Our people had no dealings with each other, or so the common wisdom dictated. What would others say? What would they think? That I was unclean for touching a potentially dead body? That I was meddling in affairs that were not my own? The whispers of judgment, real or imagined, felt like a cold breeze against my neck. But then, stronger than all the fear, stronger than all the ingrained prejudice, a different feeling began to bloom in my chest, warm and insistent. It was the sheer, undeniable humanity of the man before me. He was not a Jew. He was simply a man, a broken man, a man in dire need. His suffering was palpable, a silent scream that resonated deep within me, bypassing all the walls of custom and animosity. My heart ached, a profound ache, for this stranger lying beaten and abandoned on the unforgiving road. He was just a man, like me, who had fallen among thieves. A deep compassion, a sudden surge of tender concern welled up within me, demanding action, demanding a different path than those who had come before. It was an instinct, a quiet, powerful knowing that some things transcend all the petty squabbles and ancient grievances between peoples. This man needed help. He needed me. In that moment, the man's silent suffering spoke a language far older and truer than any prejudice I had ever known. My knees found the coarse earth, a small cloud of dust puffing up around me as I lowered myself beside him. The world narrowed then, shrinking down to the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the faint metallic scent of dried blood, and the rough texture of the ground against my palms. All the noise of the road, the distant bleating of sheep, the buzz of unseen insects. It all faded, becoming a soft, indistinct hum at the edges of my awareness. There was only this man, and the urgent, quiet task before me. My fingers, usually so practiced in the handling of coins or trade goods, now moved with a peculiar, deliberate slowness as I reached for the satchel at my side. Inside, nestled amongst my daily provisions, were the small clay flasks I always carried, one with rich, fragrant olive oil, the other a potent, dark wine. Both, I realized in that instant, could serve a higher purpose now than simply softening skin or refreshing a lonely night. I uncorked the oil first, its faint, earthy aroma filling the air, mingling with the dust and coppery tang of blood. With infinite care, I tilted the flask, letting the viscous, golden liquid spill slowly, oh so slowly, onto the lacerations that marred his pale skin. It was cool, a gentle balm against the raw, inflamed flesh. Each drop was a silent prayer for healing, a quiet intention against the violence that had brought him low. Then came the wine. This was a different kind of medicine, sharper, more insistent. I knew it would sting, cleansing the open wounds, but it was necessary. I poured it, watching as the dark liquid foamed slightly against the bloodied skin, a fizzing sound almost imperceptible. It was purifying, preparing the way for mending. My hands, surprisingly steady, continued their work, guided by an instinct deeper than any learned skill. And so, as the scripture would one day whisper, I went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. With the raw wounds now treated, I tore strips from a fresh linen cloth I carried, meant for wrapping bread or shading my face, and began the delicate task of binding. My touch was light, feather soft, firm but without undue pressure, around his head, then his arm, then the gashes on his legs. Each wrap, each tuck, was a physical manifestation of the compassion that now flowed freely through me. I could feel the faint tremor in his limbs, a residual shiver, but he made no sound, no discernible movement. He was still lost in that dark, distant place of pain, but perhaps a small flicker of comfort might reach him. My brow was furrowed in concentration, my breath held often, lest I disturb him. It was a strange intimacy, tending to a stranger, a man who by all accounts was my sworn enemy. Yet in this quiet moment, under the vast indifferent sky, we were simply two souls, one broken, one mending. There was no thought of reward, no calculation of risk, no lingering echo of the priests or the Levites. There was only the immediacy of his need and the simple, undeniable urge to alleviate it. The sun beat down, warming the rocks, but a fragile warmth began to spread through him, a silent testament to a kindness offered without question or condition. With the bandages secured and a measure of peace settling over the man's wounds, my next thought turned to his shelter. He could not remain here, exposed to the elements, to the dangers that still lurked on this desolate road. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep violet, and with the setting sun came the chill of the desert night. I needed to move him, to find him a safe place, a warm bed. My faithful donkey, a patient beast, stood a little way off, nibbling at a sparse patch of dry grass, its ears occasionally twitching at the subtle sounds of the wilderness. I walked to him, stroking his soft muzzle, and gently adjusted the saddle, ensuring it was secure and offered a stable platform. This would be a different kind of burden for him, a living, breathing, injured soul, not merely sacks of dates or jars of oil. Returning to the fallen man, I knelt once more. His eyes were still closed, his breathing shallow, a fragile thread of life. I took a deep, steadying breath myself, bracing for the effort. He was not a small man, and the weight of an unconscious body is always more cumbersome than one that can assist. Very carefully, I slid my arms beneath him, one under his shoulders, the other beneath his knees, mindful of his bandaged wounds. With a grunt of exertion, I lifted him, feeling the full, inert weight of his body against mine. It was a strain, a test of my own strength, but I moved slowly, deliberately, each muscle tensing, each step carefully placed. I held him close, cradling him like a child, as I slowly shuffled towards my donkey. And he put him on his own donkey, just as the teacher spoke of. It was a delicate maneuver, hoisting him onto the animal's back without jarring his injuries. I guided him gently, supporting his head until he was draped across the saddle, as comfortably as could be managed, his head resting against the saddle horn. I secured him with a soft rope, not tightly, but enough to prevent him from slipping, taking care not to put pressure on his chest or his bandaged limbs. He moaned once, a low, guttural sound, and my heart sank, hoping I had not caused him further pain. Then I took up the reins and began to lead my donkey forward. The journey that followed was unlike any I had ever taken on this road. Each step of the animal was slow, deliberate, a gentle sway that I hoped would soothe rather than disturb the injured man. I walked beside them, my hand often resting on the man's leg, feeling the warmth of his skin through the cloth, a silent testament to his continued, fragile life. The dust rose softly around our feet, a whisper against the growing quiet of the evening. The weight of his body on my donkey was a tangible thing, a constant reminder of the task at hand. But strangely, it was not a heavy burden to my spirit. No, my heart felt light, buoyant even, as if shed of some invisible weight. This was purpose, I realized, the purest kind, to simply do what was needed, to offer what I had, without asking, without judging, without thought of recompense. This was being a neighbor, truly. The distant flickering light of the inn promised shelter and rest, a beacon in the gathering dusk. The inn, when we finally reached it, was a sturdy structure of rough stone, its windows glowing with a warm, buttery light that spilled onto the dusty ground. The murmur of voices, the clinking of pottery, and the low snorting of donkeys drifted on the cool evening air, along with the faint, comforting scent of roasted meat and something sweet like dates or honey. My own donkey, bless its patient heart, seemed to sigh with relief as I guided it towards the entrance, its ears twitching towards the promise of hay and water. Carefully, I dismounted, my muscles protesting from the long journey. The injured man stirred faintly as I reached for him, a soft groan escaping his lips, but he remained deeply unconscious, a heavy, vulnerable weight in my hands, though calloused from travel and trade, were surprisingly gentle as I settled the injured man into the innkeeper's care, a quiet, almost reverent act. I watched as the innkeeper, a man with a surprisingly soft gaze despite his gruff exterior, nodded understandingly, his hands already moving to assess the man's state. 2 denarii, a day's wages for a labourer, felt like a small offering for such a precious burden, but it was what I had, along with a promise to return and settle any further debts. The innkeeper simply nodded, a silent pact made between us in the dim light of the common room. Stepping back out into the cool night air, the stars seemed to twinkle with a renewed brilliance against the vast, dark canvas of the sky. My donkey, now unburdened of its passenger, let out a soft huff, its breath pluming faintly in the cooler air as I led it away from the inn's entrance. The saddle, which had felt so weighted, now felt almost buoyant beneath my hand, a stark reminder of the absence of the man I had carried. The journey felt different now, lighter in a physical sense, yet somehow heavier in the quiet chambers of my own heart. The road, which had moments ago seemed fraught with peril and sorrow, now stretched out before me under the watchful eye of the moon, bathed in a silver glow. I walked for a time, letting my donkey set its own slow pace, the soft scuff of its hooves on the dusty path, the only sound to accompany my thoughts. My mind drifted back to the 2 men who had passed by earlier, the priest so quick in his stride, so certain in his aversion, and the Levite, whose hesitation had been almost palpable before he, too, turned away. What had they been thinking, I wondered? What urgent business, what fear of defilement could have overridden the sight of a man gasping for life? It was not for me to judge their hearts, I knew that, but as I continued my solitary way, the question that had been posed to the teacher by the lawyer echoed in my mind, "And who is my neighbour?" A simple question, yet in that moment it felt profound, ringing with new clarity. I had always known my own people, my own kin, as neighbours. But this man, a Jew, one from a people who held Samaritans in such disdain, had he been my neighbour? My heart whispered, yes. The warmth of the oil and the sting of the wine on his wounds, the careful bandaging, the arduous lift onto my own animal, these actions had not been born of shared lineage or common worship. They were born of a simple, undeniable truth. A fellow human being was suffering, and I had the means to offer solace. It was not about where he came from, or what our histories dictated, but about the shared vulnerability that binds us all under this vast sky. I recalled the final words of the teacher's story, a story I had heard whispered in the marketplaces, the very one I had just lived. Which of these 3, do you think, proved to be a neighbour to the man who fell among the robbers? The answer, clear as the desert stars above me, was the one who showed him mercy. Mercy. It was a word that settled in my spirit like a cool spring, refreshing and deeply true. This, I realized, was what it meant to walk righteously, not just in keeping the letter of the law, but in the open, willing heart that extends itself without question. A profound sense of peace, a quiet contentment settled over me then, washing away the weariness of the day. It was a peace that transcended the physical journey, touching the very core of my being. The road ahead felt different now, imbued with a quiet purpose that transcended the simple act of travel. The desert night had fully descended now, a velvet cloak embroidered with 1,000,000 distant stars, each one a pinprick of ancient light. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint, sweet scent of night-blooming jessamine from some hidden wadi, or perhaps just the memory of the wind that had stirred the thyme earlier in the day. My steps, once urgent, had softened to a measured rhythm, a quiet shuffling of sandals on the dusty path, each one a small whispered prayer of gratitude. This quiet purpose, it wasn't a burden, but a gentle lifting, a softening of the heart that felt more precious than any treasure I could carry in my saddlebag. And as you listen, friend, perhaps you feel a similar quiet settling within your own spirit. The day's anxieties, the hurried thoughts that often swirl like dust devils in the mind, can begin to soften, can they not? Let the gentle hum of this story, the distant echo of a donkey's hooves on a moonlit path, lull those racing thoughts into a peaceful slumber. Allow the warmth of the night, the quiet stillness, to enfold you now, like a soft blanket drawn up to your chin. May your eyelids grow heavy, your breath deepen, finding its own natural, soothing rhythm. For the truth is, this journey, this life we walk, is not always about grand pronouncements or visible deeds that shout for attention. Sometimes, often even, it is in the smallest gestures, the quiet turning of the heart towards another, that we find our true path. It is in the choice to look, truly look, at the one who lies broken by the wayside, even if they are a stranger, even if they are different from us, even if society tells us to avert our gaze. The world, I have learned, is full of people walking on the other side of the road, and sometimes it needs just one person to step across. We are all, in our own ways, travelers on this road to Jericho, carrying our own burdens, our own hopes. And sometimes we are the one who is hurt, lying vulnerable. Sometimes we are called to be the one who offers the oil and wine, the comforting hand, the promise of care. The teacher, the one whose story I have just shared with you, he taught that we should go and do likewise. He didn't say, go and do likewise, if they are of your tribe, or if they are of your understanding. No, he simply said, go and do likewise. It's an invitation, a soft whisper that echoes in the quiet chambers of the heart, asking us to be present, to be kind, to see the shared humanity in every soul. So now, as the night deepens and the stars seem to twinkle just for you, release the last vestiges of your day. Let the quiet courage of a simple act of mercy settle into your bones. Feel the soft earth beneath you, the gentle breath in your lungs, the slowing beat of your own heart. There is a deep, abiding peace in knowing that even a small act of kindness can ripple out, touching lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. It is in this spirit of open-heartedness, this gentle willingness to connect, that true rest can be found. May your own journey be filled with peace, and your heart ever open to the quiet call of compassion as you drift into a deep and blessed sleep. Bedtime.